everybody, and welcome back. Well, we have a comparison video today between two Olympia SM typewriters. On your right, we have a 1957 Olympia SM3, and on your left is a 1978 Olympia SM9. This is the second to the last year they made the SMs. And it would be great, I think, to compare these from really near the beginning of the whole series to near the very end of it. Stay tuned. Well, my very poor German pronunciation, SM in these typewriters is Schreibmaschinen Mittelgroß, which is like medium big typewriter, medium big writing machine. If I got that wrong, hey, drop a comment down below. But that's the lineup, the middle-sized portable typewriters of the SM series. They don't really identify the machine itself with its model number. Certainly you won't find like SM3 printed on this machine or SM9 printed on this machine. You have to know the features and the general design era and look on the typewriter database, and it'll tell you where they changed, like from SM3 to 4, or they were actually being made simultaneously. Anyways, there were some overlap in these SM model numbers, but you have to figure out the features and the era that they were built in to know exactly which SM you have. That being said, the SM series of Olympias are very highly regarded with a lot of typewriter collectors because they are so well built. They do have a particular feel or touch to them compared to other typewriters, so not everybody likes the feel. Some people think that they feel a little bit too stiff. If you're maybe a liker of let's say Olivetti's and Hermes typewriters, you might find these a little stiffer and harder. Other people really love the solidity of them. Well, if you look at the side view profiles of both machines, it certainly appears they are different machines. What I really love about the SM3 and 4 is this metal trim, the chrome trim along the base of it, and up here along the base of the ribbon cover. Just very handsome looking typewriter. I don't know if any machine manufactured in this era could have been made with better aesthetics than the SM3 and 4. Just really a beautiful machine. Well, on the other hand, the SM9 of this era is definitely a different looking machine, definitely more 1970s styled with this off-white and dark gray two-tone finish. There is a certain practicality to this particular body shell style in that you can lift up the shell and more easily gain access not only to change the ribbon and maybe clean the type slugs, but you actually get access to the areas underneath the ribbon, including the type R linkages and all that. So it definitely opens up the machine more for some maintenance you might need to do. Well, clearly there are some design similarities that Olympia retained throughout the life of these two machines. The carriage release button on the right side here and here, they look very similar. There's a little bit of difference. But of course you'll notice the SM3 does not have a carriage release lever on the left side, so the earlier machines only had one on the right, which is kind of a slight disadvantage, I'd say. Although you do have the aesthetics of these machines, but as far as practical use, yeah, they're missing the other carriage release button. So the SM9, of course, has it right here on both sides. But the margin settings look very similar. You notice it's a two-piece control. There's a piece with an arrow, and on the SM3 it's painted red. On the SM9 it's just a molded mark, not painted, and then it has the little part next to it with the little serrated lines, and you pinch that and slide it. So that's the adjustment. Pinch and slide, very similar. So there is a paper guide on both machines, and they look very similar, but I would say the metal finish on the SM3, this is clearly chrome plating, whereas on the SM9 it's just steel, not chrome plated. And that's true also with the margin settings here. These are just steel, these are chrome plated. You'll see similar differences also, like for instance the carriage release button, the paper release lever here is not chrome plated, it is here, and you notice there's a slight difference in shape. This one's sort of oval shape, this is more rectangular. So on both of these machines, when you pull the paper release lever all the way, it slightly raises the paper bale. And this one, of course, it does the same thing. It raises the paper bale. The paper bale rollers on the SM9 are bigger in diameter, but they feel harder, almost like plastic, whereas this is clearly rubber. And these have little metal bushings on the inside with some little metal spring pieces that holds them, and it gives you friction where you can slide the roller, but it doesn't move freely on its own. Where these are just more of a friction fit. They don't have that fancy metal insert. Okay, the paper scale on the SM3 is a nice aluminum scale with engraved painted markings and a red mark for the center, whereas on the SM9, this is one of the weak spots of this design, is it uses this plastic paper scale held in place by these two metal clips. I had an earlier version of the SM9, it was a wide carriage version, and on that other one, this plastic protrusion was broken, so this whole paper scale was flopping loose. It wouldn't be held by the clip here. So this is a weak spot of this design, is these plastic paper scales. Another weak spot with these machines is these plastic card guides will get broken if you're not careful. The plastic does get brittle with age. Okay, on the left side of the platen here on the SM9, there is a lever here for the line spacing selector, and it is 1, 1.5, and 2 lines. And on the SM3, it is also 1, 1.5, and 2 lines. So on the SM3, you have a line spacing disconnect by pushing this lever here down, and that disables the ratchet for the line spacing, but it's a temporary disconnect. Once you re-engage it, you're back to the very same line spacing, whereas the permanent line spacing variable is this button on the right platen knob here. You push it to turn it, and that will permanently change your line spacing. On the SM9, permanent line spacing ratchet disconnect was pulling out the left knob, but the temporary line spacing ratchet is pushing the line spacing lever back past 1 to reveal this dot here. That is the temporary line spacing, and when you pull the line spacing lever back to one of the 3 positions, it will resume the same spacing. Both machines have a paper support arm, and they're deployed by pushing a button on the right side, and the paper support finger or arm is telescoping. It has graduated marks here, and this is how you can use it for a end-of-line indicator. Is when you first feed your paper in, you have the paper at the top margin, and you set the length of the arm to touch the bottom of the paper, and then as the paper feeds through the machine, once the top of the paper touches the support guide, you're at the same margin position on the bottom of the page. So it's a very elegantly simple device for finding end of line, and of course both of them have very, very similar arms. I think the SM3 is this kind of brushed metal look to it. The SM9 is more just plain metal with a little bit of stamped moldings on it. I would also say this brushed metal look is also evident on the type guide right here, whereas the SM9 is just more plain looking steel. So the paper bale is a little different on both machines. On the SM3, you have these 2 finger protrusions on either side, which is really handy for flipping it up with your finger. But on the SM9, it's more of a crescent shaped with some textured knurling or notches in it. It doesn't protrude out as much. It probably uses less metal. These parts would have required bending and stuff, a separate manufacturing step to bend these parts into shape, where this is more probably simpler to make, so there's a little styling difference there. Both paper bales have a scale also, paper scale, but the SM3 has the red triangle in the middle of the scale, whereas the SM9 is a black triangle, just like on its paper scale back here. So let's look at the keyboards here. Now, keyboards do vary according to the era that the machine was made and which country that the machine was to be marketed in. Both of these machines were marketed into the US market, but you'll see with the older SM3 it does not have the number 1 key. It has a plus equals in place of the number 1. The plus equals on the SM9 is over here, and it has an exclamation mark and a 3/4 fraction over here on the right, whereas the SM9 does not have the 3/4 fraction. Its exclamation mark is above the 1 key here. So you have the 1/4 and 1/2 fraction on both machines, very common with American typewriters. You have the at and the cent symbol right below that, which is again common, and the usual colon, semicolon, and then slash and question mark keys. Very similar on both of them. And both of them also have the ribbon bichrome setting lever on the right side of the keyboard. The SM9 has a plastic knob on a metal arm, and the SM3 is more of a chrome-plated metal arm itself. Both of these levers, the top of the ribbon is toward the rear of the machine, the bottom ribbon position is toward the front of the machine, so they operate the same way. And both of them have the tab keys in the upper right corner. The tabulators for the SM9 are key set tabulators, so you have this plus and minus here. This lever here is your tab set and tab clear for each individual position. And I will mention also, all the way over here on the upper left corner of your picture, this white lever is the tab clear for all the tabs. Whereas the tabulator on the SM3, it is individual slugs that are adjusted for the tabulators. Let me pick the machine up and show you. Ouch. So the SM3 on the back of the machine has these individual tab slugs that you can slide, and there are 1, 2, 3, there's 6 of them. So you have 6 tabs that you can operate, and that's how they move. You set each one individually, so there is no master tab clear on this machine. Otherwise, all the keys on both machines, with the exceptions of what I've mentioned, they're in the same location, including your backspace is on the right side, and of course it has an arrow indicating the direction that the carriage will be moving, not the direction of your typing position, right? So that's a little bit non-intuitive for newcomers to manual typewriters. Of course, you have your shift and shift lock. On the SM3, the shift lock can only be cleared with the left shift button. On the SM9, the shift lock can be cleared with either. You'll notice when you're shifting on the SM9, both shift buttons go down at once, whereas on the SM3, the shift buttons operate independently of each other. Another little difference. Okay, I was interested in comparing the keyboards of both of these machines, so I measured the A row from the left side of the A key to the left side of the @ key on both of them, and they're the same width. However, on the vertical tiers, the SM9 is a little bit wider spaced front to back, so the SM3 is a little steeper, but the shift lock when next to the A key is spaced the same distance on both machines. However, on the SM3, the top surface of the shift lock key is lower by, let's say, 2 or 3 millimeters. So it's easier to hit the shift lock by mistake on the SM9 because it's closer to being at the same level of the A key, whereas on the SM3 it's lower. That's one of the big differences that I notice in the feel of this machine, and as you guys remember perhaps from a previous video where I covered the SM9, I did 3D print some keycaps for the A key just to help my little pinky finger to hit the A key before I accidentally bump the shift lock and print the A a little bit too low, which gets us to the subject of shifting. The SM9, this is one of the huge differences between these machines. SM9 is segment shift, and it is very light, a very light touch to move the segment. SM3 is carriage shift, as you can see, and it is significantly heavier. Now there is a way to adjust the spring tension on the SM3 to help the springs assist in the shifting a little bit more, so it's not quite as heavy feeling. However, intrinsically the SM3 is going to feel heavier in shifting just because it is a carriage shift machine. I personally think on this particular SM9, to me, the shifting feels almost too light. Like I should probably add a little bit more spring tension in it, because I can, with very little force, I can push the keys down just enough to start the basket to drop slightly, and if you do that, you're going to print a little low. If it was an inadvertent press of the shift key, that is. So that's the big difference. They certainly made the shifting a lot lighter by the time they got to the SM9 series. Actually, I kind of wish the SM3 was segment shift, but I wouldn't want it to be as light as it is on this particular machine. So one of the major differences between the SM3 and the SM9 is going to be the key caps on the SM3 are spring-loaded. So if I take this key right here, if I hold the key lever underneath so it doesn't move, and I push the key cap from above, you can see this. Maybe you can see it. There it is. That is spring-loaded keycaps. Now, it takes quite a bit of force to actually operate them, so you're not going to really feel the keycaps springing down until you bottom the key out when you're typing. And it takes a little bit of force to do that, so it's really intended, I think, to dampen the hand of a heavy-handed typer. If you're a light touch typer, you might not hardly notice this spring-loaded dampening at all, but it is a unique feature to this era of Olympia SM3. Well, here we see, looking side view at both machines, you can see the difference in style of the carriage return levers. So the SM3 has this more curved, hooked lever that is chrome plated, whereas the SM9's is shiny, but I don't really think it's plated as well, and it's more rectangular. But there is one difference between the two. The SM9, the lever folds down. There's a little detent here on the hinge point with a spring-loaded ball bearing, and this is for securing the lever in place before you put it in the case, and that just pops up like that. Whereas on the SM3, it doesn't really hinge down, and you got to be careful. Don't try to break it. Don't try to bend it. It doesn't bend. It's not supposed to. Here you can see also the styling differences. The side cap of the Carriage is the painted side cap, the same color as the upper part of the body shell, whereas on the SM3 it is clearly nice shiny chrome plating. Also, I like, you notice here, the chrome plating on the little bracket for the foot. That's another little detail that makes the SM3 so pretty looking. Well, you can see here between the SM3 and the SM9, they've definitely changed their logo. So Olympia in the early days had this raised molded script style Olympia logo, whereas later on they used this Olympia International orange logo, kind of O with an I engraved in it, and this more sans serif block style Olympia logo here, more indicative of the 1970s styling. Well, here we see the underbellies of both machines. This being the SM9, here's the SM3. Well, you can notice the feet are different. The SM3 has these rectangular feet with these metal inserts, and they actually feel pretty soft on the SM3, surprisingly so. The SM9 is round with some washers and screws in the middle. They're a little bit harder, but they're still resilient. Both machines, you may not be able to see from this angle, both of them have these two little square rectangular notches in the back, and that's for mounting them into the cases. But I wanted to show you the similarities in design between these two typewriters. They're clearly of the same evolutionary design, because you'll see the key levers here are the same basic configuration, except you don't, on the SM3 you have these little spring clips for the keycaps that I just showed you, whereas they don't have those on the SM9. And then this space bar operation rod with the spring here looks very similar. You'll notice on the SM9 there's only a single spring here. The SM3 there's a dual spring setup on the space bar mechanism. And then the SM3 also has this little collar with two set screws, and that is how you can control the timing of the operation of the spacebar relative to when it trips the escapement. You can alter the angle of this on the rod, whereas on the SM9 that particular feature is fixed, and if there is any adjustment it would be back here at the escapement itself. So you notice in the middle part of the typewriter then you're going to have the main part of your type bar linkages with this crossbar, and this bar here is really the universal bar. So the key levers operate the universal bar, and the universal bar operates the ribbon spool rotation and the ribbon lift. And then you'll notice here each of the key levers has a set of springs. So they're very similar. You might notice on the SM9 there's 3 springs here, here, and here that I've stretched them out and looped them a little bit tighter, and that was because I was having issues with 3 of these tight bars hanging up or being slow to retract. So there's some similarities there. I think one of the big differences you might notice, though, if you can see it, in the SM9 the spring motor is plastic. The whole housing for the spring motor right here is plastic, whereas on the SM3 it is a metal spring motor housing. So that would be the one issue I'd be concerned about, is this right there. You can see that white plastic. That's the spring motor. And there's also a white plastic housing. That's the clutch for the tabulator clutch. Those 2 housings are plastic, whereas on the SM3 they are metal. And that would be the only huge difference I would see between those 2 in terms of reliability and longevity. And also, I must point out to you that this is one of the common problems you see on these older SM3s and 4s. There's a set of rubber bushings between the outer body and the inner chassis, and they're located underneath here, 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 and here, basically underneath these 4 screws. Those bushings get compressed and hard with age, and it causes the carriage to drag on the body. And so what you do is you just flip it over like this. You take off each one of these screws one at a time, and you can replace these with rubber washers that you get at the hardware store. Whereas on the SM9, those equivalent bushings are actually part of the feet. The rubber foot has an extra part below it that actually serves as that bushing. So it's all built into the foot itself instead of being a separate washer, which means there's a lot more rubber there. There's less of a chance of it wearing out. But when it does wear out, or if it does, you're going to be hard pressed to replace it because it's part of one molded piece of rubber that serves also as the foot. So here we see, looking under the hood of both machines, I've gone ahead and removed the top hinged body shell on the SM9. It uses similar ribbon reversing methods. On the SM9, it uses the guide kind of slides this way when it gets to the end of the ribbon, and it can be driven just by tension. Where the SM3, when it gets to the end of the ribbon, the angle of the ribbon causes the guide to flip down, and this one flips up, and that's how it does the reversing. Both machines use a light rubber key lever rest here, right here and here. This is sort of light gray, rubbery tight bar rest, I should say, right here and here. Very similar, so that hasn't changed much. Engraving on the SM3, you might be able to see, says Deluxe, and this type guide has some swirl finish. There's a name for this particular kind of finish on the metal itself. Whereas on the SM9, it's just plain steel and there's no deluxe badging. And I don't know when they got rid of the deluxe badging on the SM9. Those things kind of came and went throughout the whole line of SM series typewriters. Okay, so another difference in the location of features is on the SM3, your touch control is way over here on the right, and you pull it towards you to increase the tension. Whereas on the SM9, it is in front of the left ribbon spool way over here, and you pull it down, or sort of down and towards you to increase tension, and you raise it to decrease tension. And another difference yet again is carriage lock. So the carriage lock on the SM9 is this lever. You push it back away from you and that will lock the carriage. Pull it towards you, unlocks the carriage. Whereas on the SM3, the carriage lock is this little guy here, and it's kind of at times a little non-intuitive or counterintuitive. You basically raise it up to lock and you push it down to unlock. And it is a true carriage lock. It actually locks the carriage in both directions, so it keeps it nice and secure. Well, let's feed some paper into the SM3. This has a very nice touch to it. I noticed that I don't seem to have the interference on my left pinky between the A key and the shift lock, because the shift lock is sitting a few millimeters lower than on the SM9. It has a very good touch to it. I don't specifically recall feeling the spring-loaded keycaps because I'm not really hitting it that hard. And the typeface looks really nice. This is a metric, I guess you call it typeface. It's roughly 11.5 characters per inch. Feels really nice. Okay, by the way, I'm noticing, and I didn't notice this on the last video I made about this machine, but I'm noticing a little wobble here between the feet on the bottom. I don't know if my table, I don't think it's my table, but there must be a slightly compressed or something going on with one of these rubber feet here. So anyways, there is that. So that'll probably drive me nuts here. So anyways, we'll feed the paper in. We're going to use the same piece of paper we used before. Well, okay. It definitely feels different. It feels a little bit more play in the keys. It's not quite as solid as the SM3. I certainly have the interference more between the A key and the shift lock because the face of the shift lock is just so much higher. It's closer to the A, and you guys knew that because I talked about it in the last video. I don't know, it doesn't feel as good as the SM3. I'll say it that way. Where is my touch setting set to? It is maximum, or it was closer to the minimal setting, so I'm going to put it about midway on the touch. Yes. When I had 3 of the type bars snagged there, that's something that happens on this machine. 3 of the type bars, it's not all the same 3, but it just looks like the type bars don't retract as fast as they could, and so you end up out typing the machine. Some type bars are heading back, others are coming forward, and they get snarled together. That happens repeatedly on this machine. The keyboard somehow feels more cramped than on the SM3, even though the spacing is the same. I don't really know if the keycaps are actually bigger in size than on the SM3, and hence maybe they're closer together. They look like they may be slightly bigger. I see between the two machines I am looking, it looks like there's a little bit more space between the keys on the SM3, whereas the SM9, they're a little wider at the wide end and they're a little closer, so maybe it means that if you have sausage fingers, you're going to hit the corner of a neighboring key and kind of start snarling things up. It's just not quite as comfortable to type on. And the solidity of it, like there's a little bit more of a dead zone when you first press the key. You can feel that amount of motion is happening before you actually start moving the type bar, where it just feels more solid on the SM3. These are small differences. They're kind of subtle, but they do make a huge difference in the way the machine operates, and that's my biggest gripe I have with this SM9. It just feels a little cheaper. It doesn't feel as solid, and I have these consistent problems. Like I say, my pinky rolling off the A key, getting snarled on the shift lock, causing the shifting to drop a little, printing the A low, and then these 3-letter combinations, you know, where it's I can snarl type bars together more. It just seems to happen more on this machine. That being said, if you're a little bit more of a careful typist, you know, in practical terms, if you're going to be just 2-finger typing or just typing a little bit slower, then this machine will work fine for you. But I just think it's easy to out-type this machine. You can go so fast that it starts having problems. That said, it has a rather pleasant typeface. Here you can see on top is the SM3, and on the bottom is the SM9. SM9 has, don't know what the typeface is called, but it's definitely a wider looking typeface. So this looks like it's at 11 characters per inch, where the SM3 is like 11.5-ish. A little bit bigger of a typeface. The letters appear wider. However, you might notice some things like, for instance, here, this second sentence, you notice how the F doesn't line up with the F above it? Well, this is a problem I've seen on this machine also, is the first letter after a space, in other words, the first letter of a word, it happens a little too early, almost like the escapement isn't completely done moving the carriage on the space when the next letter happens. Next letter happens a little early. This is also a function of out-typing the machine. If you type really fast on it, you start getting that problem as well. I'm assuming for now that this is just this particular machine, but I don't have another of the 1978 era SM9s to know whether this is a design issue. Maybe the later machines were more like this. I don't know. I'm assuming it's just this machine that needs a little service. Well, so my opinions about this SM9 versus this SM3 is kind of mixed. There are some intrinsic differences based on simply the design of the machines that you have to consider, as I've covered earlier, but I think the biggest issue I have personally is this particular SM9 just doesn't perform as well as it should, even compared to non-Olympia machines. It has a nice imprint though. That's the thing that frustrates me. It has a really nice imprint. If you take your time and maybe two-finger type a little slower, it works fine. But rapid touch typing, I'm not the fastest touch typist, but I seem to be able to out-type this machine. But I can't really advise you on buying one of these later SM9s because I don't know if it's intrinsic to the whole model lineup, like a design issue, or if it's just this particular machine. So I would say, test it out. If you find an SM9 at your local typewriter shop or a thrift store or wherever, maybe you go to a type-in and you see one of these later ones, give it a good test. Do some touch typing. See if you can rapidly type on it without any problems. If so, fantastic. But just be aware, I've had issues with this one. As far as the SM3, it's a wonderful machine. I think the fact that it's carriage shift is the only thing that would make me think about using another machine. If you're going to do some serious writing between these two machines, you'll probably pay more money though for one of these, but I would kind of tend to draw you toward one of these machines, but especially look for one in good condition. And be aware those bushings underneath the body that I showed you that tend to get compressed, that's always an issue when you buy one of these. Those need to be replaced. But I would also say if you want to have one of these machines as a serious writing tool, consider having the platen replaced if you can't take it apart yourself and remove it. I think these machines are really worth spending some money on because they are so well made and they just last and last. You can see the same kind of engineering philosophy in the newer SM9, but you can also see where cost has been cut, quality has been cut, plastic parts in the spring motor and the tabulator clutch, etc., instead of metal. So some compromises by the time they got to this in 1978. And so as always, this is for the purpose of fostering your creativity. So I wish you the very best in your creative pursuits. Have a nice day. Bye-bye for now.